Melissa Arechiga and Vicente Montalvo, they are both direct descendants from the families that were displaced, La Loma, Bishop, and Palo Verde. And they have a lot to teach us, right? I first met Melissa after I did a performance for poetry in East Los for Mexica New Year back in 2018. And my poem was about reclaiming our land and being unapologetically indigenous and all of this. And she came up to me and she told me, hey, have you heard of Palo Verde and the injustice that took place there by the Dodger Corporation? She's like, I'm actually a descendant of those families. And I was like, what? Like, I don't have enough information, right? Like that completely like blew my mind. So we've been in contact since then. In 2021, when I'm sure we'll get into, was a huge historical protest where 3 runners took Dodger Stadium, ran in with the actual signs of the names of the communities that were displaced, right? When that happened, it was a reminder to me that I had to speak to them directly, that I had to share the platform. And I interviewed Melissa, Chente, and the activists involved in that. And that happened in 2021. And here we are again today as part of this course where I want them to come in, take up space, tell us their story, so that way you can learn directly from them, right? What happened? What does justice look like? What is the next move? How can we support them? Okay. So without further ado, I will mute myself. Please, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat. We will be taking questions and comments at the end. And with that, I will put it on to either Vincent or Melissa. Either one of you can please introduce yourselves and go for it. Guide us through it. I will now mute myself.
All right. So hello, and thank you for having us. My name is Melissa Arechiga. I am the co-founder of Buried Under the Blue. I am a living descendant of the families of Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop. I am a direct descendant of the Arechiga family. My family can be seen and is known as some of the most the women in my family are known as some of the most outspoken, and they were the most photographed throughout this ordeal, and especially on Black Friday, which was May 9th of 1959. You can see my great-grandmother, Avrana Arechiga, throwing rocks at the police, her daughter, Aurora Vargas, being carried out by 4 officers, and my mother, who was a little girl, also being carried out from their homes. They were wrongfully destroyed and wrongfully also known as CHAVEZ Ravine, which it's not CHAVEZ Ravine. And so part of what we're here today to do is to share that information and tell our stories, because for too long our stories have been told and been controlled by the colonial standard. And so no longer will that happen. And we're here as the families to tell our stories and again, to change that narrative and use this history and this story to bring it into the current with the current housing crisis that we have. So next I'll let Vincent introduce himself.
Vincent, I think you're muted. Oh, there we go.
Sorry. Okay. I want to first thank Mexican Excellence, because without her in this platform, none of us would be here today. And for her guidance and education and all the work that she's done. It's very important, you know, and I think for all of us here, like myself, I'm the descendant of my grandmother and grandfather and great-grandparents, Adela de Nava and the Garcia family from there. And my grandparents today are still alive, which is awesome because they're like a history book. My mom was the last person born in Palo Verde. And so our history is so rich in Los Angeles. It was relevant then, even more relevant today, on the issues of housing, redlining, displacement. This goes even back to 1492, right? Because the narrative just keeps playing over and over again. And my role is always been to be a housing advocate and to travel across the nation talking about these issues of changing our history, the importance of our history, and how we can be part of that change and why we have to control the narrative of the needs that we need, right? So again, I want to thank Mexican Excellence for providing this platform and all of you for taking time out of your busy days but trust me, this is great education for your future and your children's future and your children's future. Melissa?
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you so much. Go for it.
So we want to start with the history of our communities and understand that how they came to be. And so most of our families had migrated from Mexico during the Mexican Revolution. My family migrated from Durango and Zacatecas, and many of the families did, but we also had other families from like Chihuahua, and I'm not sure exactly where Vincent's family's roots are from. But they found, this plot or this area that they could build their homes, and it was an ability for them to create something that they didn't have back where they had left their homes and their communities back there. But it was an opportunity to rebuild the rancho setting that they had come to know, live, and were familiar and very comfortable with. And in this place, it was isolated, alone. How do you say it? It was isolated, it was alone. It was actually land that the city had thought that wasn't good because there was a lot of mudslides and different things that happened there. So this is how our families were able to set up their homes in that area, because they figured, well, allow them to live there, that the land was no good. So upon that, they were able to start using their skill set to build their homes. They sent back word to Durango, Zacatecas, and the communities where they came from, that they could come here and actually purchase land and be part of creating and building their community here and purchasing land. So go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, and once arriving here, a lot of people, they were very resourceful. They were also intelligent to understand that in the ravine, because it wasn't looked as a piece of property that anybody would want to develop because it was in the middle of a canyon, they decided to use their engineering techniques that they had learned from their indigenous roots and brought that education up into these areas to make it a livable situation. Some of these early communities were proven to be engineers without going to colleges. This was common knowledge for them. And I think that's important for all of us to understand the level of education that we had, common knowledge education, not college education, but this stuff that they brought in. They were also very resourceful and sustainable, because they would go around and look for houses that were being demolished, the old Victorian homes, and they would reuse the wood to actually build their homes in those communities, which they weren't shacks. A lot of these homes, if left alone, would have still been standing today. And I think that's a testament to how we as people come up and look at the past and really should challenge ourselves to be even half of what they were, because we lost a lot of that education through time, right? Especially through the traumatic experience of the three communities. Once we built these homes, we obviously were discriminated about from the city. We paid taxes, but we also didn't get the city services that we needed. And because of that, the community decided to build itself up, which it created its own commerce. It had its own stores. We had our own street vendors. We had home businesses. And so this really kept that money in the community, which gave the residents the ability to purchase not just one home, but multiple homes. So some of these records are the early portfolios of real estate moguls now, right? Because these people owned a lot of homes. The Arechiga family owned somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 7 homes. And so they were not only engineers, but they were also financially smart, because they created these opportunities within these three communities. And that was so important to the upbringing and the stories that I heard from my grandparents about saving money, not spending. And this was all brought from the Depression, right? And also from Mexico. This is post-Depression. This is just how they live within their means, not out of their means. Not like today when people purchase things that they want but not need, right? And that was taught through my bloodline. Like, you got to be careful with that, because that will always push you in the wrong side of things. And I think a lot of people in the community were like that, because the more I interviewed them, the more I understood more of the sociological makeup of our people there. Melissa, you want to take the next part?
So we were also, like Vincent had said, able to acquire the goal of home ownership there in a time when it was illegal for us throughout Los Angeles to own. It was on the books and the laws that we could not own property. So we were there. So being there, Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop, we were actually able to acquire homes and be homeowners. And like Vincent had said, my family did have a portfolio at that time of 6 to 7 homes, in addition to the engineering that he mentioned that they used in building their homes, that they would probably still be standing, which in actuality, it's very true. We have a list of 100 homes that were removed from the 3 communities and have been relocated throughout Los Angeles. And I've started to photograph them little by little. And some of those homes have also ended up at the sites of Universal Studios and are props for movies. So I think it's important that we really understand that, we were able to acquire home ownership in a time when it was illegal for people of color to own homes. And then the city decided to come in under the same circumstances that we're currently in of the housing crisis and say, now we need to make housing, and saying that our area was a good place to do that and create that, to make it available to the public. However, what I think a lot of people fail to realize is that why would we want to go into renting when we are already homeowners? And so for them to say, oh, well, we were going to get the first choice and the first pick, I think that that's a little bit of like not really being respectful to the people that have already, I guess, according to the American standard, right, the goal is homeownership. So why would we want to be reduced to renters? And really the affordable housing that they were producing and providing, or that they had planned on providing, was projects, because we do now see the projects throughout Los Angeles. So, I mean, again, to go from owning your own home and being able to build and make it bigger as your family grows and stay in a community with people that you feel comfortable with, again, where you're saving, you're building your entrepreneurship, you're a vendor, a seller, these things, like, why would you want to go back and like punch a clock and be a renter when you have all this freedom that you've been able to create for yourself in a time where, again, we're talking about segregation, redlining, different things like that. So I think it's important that we really, really understand that, because a lot of times that is not, I don't know, it's somehow missed. And I think that's important. Your turn, Vince.
Okay, so I'll take you guys back to 1951 when all of it started. In 1951, the LA Housing Authority issued eminent domain notices to the residents of the 3 communities of Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop. As you can imagine, when most of them received it, they had very little education in the system. And so some of them couldn't read, and some of them didn't understand what they had received. And basically what the project was we were going to take away your property. We were going to pay you what we thought was fair, which wasn't nothing at all. And then you're going to have to leave. And just remember, these were people that were homeowners for over 30 years after this time already. Now facing, at the time, they were all at war, because most of the families there believed that they were part of the American dream. So they gave their children to the war. And they paid dearly for it. Most of them did not return back. And in 1952, they had a meeting. And most of those meetings were women-led in our community at the time. It was driven to talk about the taking of their properties and why were they being taken away. While they're giving their children to the war, a lot of the families felt that, what if we help because we're going to get a house? This was some of the conversation happening, because this affordable housing would help so many people. And even at that point in their dreams, they were more than willing to help, except when they found out that they weren't going to be the recipients of the homes. And this is when they stopped and said, okay, then we will not give them up. And the city in 1953 returned back to the communities and said, if you don't give up your homes, we'll condemn them and you'll get nothing. So this left a lot of our members in those years between 53 and the 1950, let's say 53, 56, where they didn't know what to do. They were trying to organize. They were trying to figure out how were they going to fight this. And in 1958, just before the evictions, there was a lawsuit filed with the California Superior Court. And this is not a lot of knowledge that's told. That's why we tell people the story that's out there is a cleaned up narrative. It sounds good in the Chicano studies, but it doesn't get in depth on the actual legal process, because what we're learning today is that the taking of our land under eminent domain, on our case, set precedent. It was the first time ever that a corporation, a non-entity under the law, could be able to take away private property and transfer it over to the wealthy. And the only benefit from that was a tax benefit that the city would get, because the Dodgers would generate jobs and revenue. At that time, the definition under eminent domain didn't support that. And this court case ended up in the Superior Court, in which the judge wrote back and didn't grant them it. It actually wrote a letter, which is rare, a dissenting opinion, and where it was stinging them, because it said that not only did they take advantage of it, that they issued the Dodgers a blank check to do what they needed to do, because they got a $2 million check for the land, and they were able to grade it down, because that's what they needed at the time on top of all that money. And so this went up to the California Supreme Court. And so a lot of people don't know that it even hit the Supreme Court of California in the case. And in this case, it was deemed non-talk. They didn't talk about it. They didn't want to say anything. They didn't want to take up the case in the Supreme Court. So what happened was that there was no holding of the law or consent on law, and it was just pushed right through. Nobody said anything because our people weren't ready to fight. Most of the lawyers that fought in our case, because a lot of questions that pop up with us is, were the lawyers part of the community? Did the community organize money to get them? And the answer was no to that. The lawyers saw that this was a case that would set precedent. And it was a Jewish and an Italian lawyer, and I don't have their names. One is Silverstein, last name Silverstein. They took the case on to set precedent, because they felt that if this was able to be done to people of color, well, it might be done to anybody in the city, which we've seen throughout the history that it has been selectively used. Mind you, it has never been used on the West side. Eminent domain is something that's only used in brown and black communities to take away our homes. In 1959, that's when we had what we know today as Black Friday. This is when the sheriffs in the city of Los Angeles rolled right through the barrios, no notice, nothing, literally dragging people out of their homes. Well, the Arechiga family was the most depicted. There was about 20 families that resisted all the way to the end. Most of the families did not want to give up their properties willingly. They gave it out through fear that they would not get nothing. Some of them sold and got pennies on their homes. A lot of them had to look at the open market, and they only got some of them only got like 3,000-4,000, when at the time the houses were 20,000. And if that wasn't the worst part, when they evicted everybody out of their own community, in 1960, the city went after the Arechiga family. Because the Arechiga family, like I tell Melissa on the history, is that the city made us homeless. They put us out in the streets. Then they issued us a citation, no different than what you're seeing today with the housing and the homeless situation. They then criminalized us after they put us there. And then they wanted to forcibly remove us from there too. And that's something, that type of behavior we see too far often in our city history. And for me, that's why I always say it was relevant then. It's even more relevant today for us to really go through this process and analyze it, to understand the importance of these three communities and really its effect on all communities today. Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, as we continue to dig deep into this and learn and uncover, because as we uncover for myself and we dig deeper, it's also going to the root of the trauma, the impact that it left on our families or my family directly. And then as being an organizer and an activist and working with communities that are facing these evictions, you can see how that's still happening, and you can see how desperate our community members are. And it only reaffirms what my family, I'm sure, felt and dealt with and went through. And it's how do you say, it's good work and it feels good to help the community when they're encountering these situations, but it's also in a lightweight too. It's very traumatic because it does ring a chord deep within myself when I'm seeing them go through that, because it's like you want to protect them, and you want to help the community to really understand what has happened, not only to us, but what is still happening, and why, and how as brown people do we continue to support this when we can see those images of the police, dragging out women and children, and then bulldozing the house, and then these things. It's like when the sheriffs come and they lock people out, and it's just, it becomes a lot. But it is important that we do address it and we do have these conversations, and not only for me as I'm going through this and learning how to talk about this stuff, because in it, talking about it is the healing, and leaning into it and not away from it, and helping the community, all of these things. It's important. And to me, sometimes I feel desperate to, like, I want to get on the top of the building and I want to scream to all our people, like, get the hell out of there, get out of that goddamn stadium. Like, it's no good, it's hurting our people, it's hurting our communities. Look at all the things that we're currently encountering. And when will we learn, and when will it stop? So I'm grateful and appreciative that we're able to have this conversation with you and dig in deeper to talk about these things, because a lot of times the responses that we get from outside community people are like, get over it, the Dodgers didn't have nothing to do with it. And that is nothing but far from the truth. What happened to us is still happening, and I want it to stop happening to us, and it shouldn't be happening to us. And yeah, I think that, yeah, we need to have more discussions about it and really understand who we are and how we can help use this history to learn, to, just like this case set precedents, how do we set policy that also sets precedents to turn the tides of these things? Because it's unacceptable that people cannot even afford to live in their communities. We have a large unhoused population, especially even children, brown children that are in LA Unified School Districts. About 80% of them are brown, and about 30% are unhoused. And they don't teach us our history, and they don't teach our children civics, and teach them how to use their civics to actively advocate on behalf of themselves, to get their families and themselves out of that situation for the long haul. And so I think it's really important that we have a really in-depth conversation regarding these things. Go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, and I think something else about the three communities that's important to understand. I work in policy, both national policy and housing policy in the city of Los Angeles. And what we far often see is these words like sustainable communities. And when you look at the three communities of Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop, they practice a lot of their indigenous practices that they brought from Mexico, from their roots and their history. And we grew our own food. We raised our own meats. We basically had our own water, our own trash system. When you look at the segregated part of the LAPD that never serviced us, and they had their own policing system. And these are things that today we're trying to reinvent in the city. We're trying to figure out, how do you make a city, and yet they were villainized for it. Most people would hear words in their community like, you got too many chickens in there, or you have too many animals, or you have a yard with the front garden. That's where the earliest times of sustainability. They were building and making their own food. They bothered nobody. And when we look at the history of it and look at the economic components of it, if you left them alone, they would be able to survive even in a colonial system, because they met all the requirements that they needed, because nothing was provided for them. This is why they were able to build business, buy homes, and be really successful in the long run, in a time where all these rules and regulations didn't permit them to have that. And so we analyze those things today in the city, because I often bring up the story several times that we were destroyed for being a modeled city. And this is not the first one. This goes back way down to the indigenous times. They were the model cities of today that we should have followed. And how hard would it be for us to practice those things today in our own lives? So I could see how hard the city takes it because it cuts into the money and the politics system. But I think as the communities grew up into it, even my grandfather, they understood what was going on and what needed to be done because they provided for their communities for such a long time. Even after all this happened, and I always remember this too, after 1960, in 62 when the stadium opened, there was still a lot of resentment against the Dodgers. The story turns around where it kind of gets, I always think about it because when we tell it, we have to tell it like it is. The person who swayed the Dodgers or who merged the Dodgers and our brown community was Fernando Mania. It was the first time we had an iconic person in the middle of anything of importance. And Fernando, in today's modern term, and I use it, but I use it just as a process or a point of history, but it was the transition. And I never say it to diminish women or anything, but it was the Malinche period, right? Even though we know that there were a lot of things that she didn't have, today we look at it and Fernando was that one person that crossed us over. There's always one person that needs to cross us over or a minor group of people to take the masses in the wrong direction. And we can see that throughout history. So this stuff continues to repeat itself as it happens. And it leaves us in a situation where we want to say, or what people think we should say about him is, you're a bad person. But we also have to remember that they're using him all the time. They plucked him out of a rancho. That talent that he has, that is Mexican talent. That you cannot duplicate no matter which way. The problem is he was part of the Dodger Corporation. And the Dodger Corporation was the tainted person in the room that just happened to exploit him again. And even today, is exploited. So it's very hard for us sometimes when we have those because we don't want to diminish our own people, but because they're connected to corporations, which is the key focus, it's the corporation. And like Melissa was saying earlier, a legal fight that a lot of people don't know that's been happening for a long time with the Dodgers in the city. I often propose this to a lot of people. Let's blame the city of Los Angeles. They're 100% the people, the rotten people that took our land. But see, that leaves a legal problem. That means that the Dodgers are in possession of stolen property. And in the laws of then and the laws of today, stolen properties return right back to the rightful heirs. And so you're either going to say you have stolen property, you bought stolen property, or you were the thief that stole it. And so this is why to this day, the Dodgers have not made any type of, how can I put it, response to the news media that's questioned them. They have not made a response to our request or other people's request. They have been silent on the issue. And this is important for us to understand who's really at fault. And we blame them all. It's not just two agencies. It was the sheriffs, the LA County supervisors. They all did wrong. And that's why in the organization today, we have made our mission to make sure that we collect the stories of our elders as we are the gatekeepers of their stories. And our stories go along with it. As like for me, I was very lucky to have my grandparents and my mother and have these hard conversations with them on how, they took the land, how they felt. This is coming out of the mouth of the people that were there in 1958 and 1959 when the lands were being taken. And then the traumatic experiences that my mother went through on the loss of home because they had a house. Now they had to move into an apartment. And like we tell people, this is how we built the foundation of what today we're working on with Melissa and a couple of other people on reparations, because we also believe in respecting the indigenous component. While we may be indigenous to this continent, we're not indigenous to this territory. And so we've worked with the Quiche Nation and part of our reparations to also standardize it nationwide, which is that the land should go back to the Quiche Nation and that reparations should be paid to the families for their investment in the land. This would be a full circle for all of us to be able to heal in a process of proper reparation. Today's reparations is political. It's all to give the land back and cleanse it of its wrong, with the situation in Bruce's Beach. That is a good case for you guys to study on how reparations was created politically, how reparations was then given to the Bruce's family, which, you know, for the record, we think that they deserve 100% reparations. But the land should have been returned back to the first people. If not, we're just recreating the colonial part of that land through a political process, because that land was then sold back as if it got cleansed. It will never be cleansed until it lands in the hands of the indigenous people, the original first peoples of the territories. And that's a stance that we've taken politically and nationally to try to get that changed with the three communities. And this is just the work that we believe, because the communities were knit tight. Remember, these communities on the weekends, not just one family, the whole neighborhoods would come to center town to carne asada, carnitas. Everybody will talk about it, you know, in the stories. And we have some that we'll release later with some of the elders talking about, you know, the panaderias. They used to make bolillos, and they would come out and just eat in the community. It was just something that was such a fairy tale. Even to me, to hear it from my parents, I look out my window and I'm like, where's that? I mean, are you guys sure that this is not a fairy tale? Because what you're telling me is something that we might have seen in a movie, but they lived it. Because, you know, like my grandfather had tons of stories about the avocado tree that I thought was made up until I saw the actual pictures on the hills. How they used to steal tortillas, and they would take their little foil with salt, and they would sit up there and they would eat the ones that you can eat the peel off of it. And so they would just put them in the tortilla, and they'd be up there until sunset, just eating tortillas. And you could just imagine, you know, all this, you know, these great stories that they told us. Or I said, how did you guys play with toys? What are you talking about? They would go to the garden and they would cut off a leaf from the calabaza or the pumpkin, and they would turn them into flutes. So I grew pumpkins in my yard because I said that's a bunch of bull, it's a baloney. And my grandfather came and he made one. And so these types of things for me were like precious, right? Because not a lot of people get to engage with all of that. And I think it's important that we talk, because the three communities is not just Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop. They're your communities too that are being attacked right now. And some people are feeling this, because I talk to a lot of people throughout the city on losing their housing. And that means that when you feel insecurities of not being able to afford your house, that is what Palo Verde felt. When you look at the issues of worrying all the time because you don't know what's going to happen at the end of the month, it's exactly what our people felt. And those feelings should never have been come across to us in this rich, you know, state, but they have. And that's something later down the road that Buried Under the Blue is trying to push out, because we want to talk more about the history. And then after we understand the history, what does the solution look like? What does a modern day indigenous person look like trying to fight and combat these things while still going through the trauma? And that's something that has, like Melissa was saying, you know, it's led us to, there's a lot of things that we like, and sometimes there's good and bad days. But the one thing I always tell her, we never stop, because the people of Palo Verde to this day have never stopped. Melissa, I'll throw it back to you.
No, you know, and even here, just sitting here listening to some of the stories that Vincent tells and shares, like, you know, I enjoy hearing them too, because again, like how he said, he's fortunate that his family is still alive. A lot of my family, the adults are no longer around, and it's more like the cousins, and even my mom that was a child there, she was only 5. And the impact of the May 9th, 1959, known as Black Friday, the impact it had on my family is something that I don't even think I have the correct word to describe the damage that it did to them. And so unfortunately, you know, there was a different kind of maybe non-talking that was going on in my household. And I grew up in a home with 4 survivors. And so it wasn't something that was often talked about, but it was something that you could feel within them, you know, the strife, the thickness of being hurt, being broken, being disenfranchised, being, I would say, like dismembered, pulled apart, you know, crushed to the furthest extent that you could think of, you know, being beat down. So, you know, that's a different kind of putting yourself back together. and a different way of like, I have to swallow this and push through and continue to, put food on the table, pay the bills, keep a roof over the head, and kind of just swallow it. And where it becomes this like thickness, where like there wasn't a lot of talking. There was just a lot of like, get through it, suck it up, keep pushing on. And I did notice that a lot, when we would go after to family things, with the women from Palo Verde, that they were very strong women. They were very outspoken, but they were very tough, and I get it now. When I was a young girl, it was a little bit frightening to me. But it's so funny now being an adult woman, I see that I have encapsulated that. And sometimes even my own presence has been received or probably visualized or, has been translated into that, and me giving what I maybe feared as a kid, now I've taken on, and sometimes my presence can be strong, can be that, and sometimes it can be other things. It just depends. But I do appreciate that what I did learn from them was to be strong, but it was also a different kind of not talking about it. And when it was talked about, it was usually behind disagreements of current situations that were going on with the family. So I can still see the remnants of the tragedy in my family, even in myself and my children. And so, I think that these are important things that we need to understand, that housing is very important to our people, to be able to be stable and a foundation where you don't have to worry about those things so that you can grow to your full potential and thrive, and really find your purpose is very important. So for me, that's where it becomes a lot for me sometimes when we're working with the community and they're facing these evictions and these things. It bothers me a lot because, they're good people. They want to do good things with themselves. They're for their children. We want to live good lives. Nobody wants to have hard lives. We want to do the things that we need to do in order to take care of our families. And yeah, it's important. And I really want some things to change within policy. I really would like our people to really understand and wake up to who they are, their power of who they are, of the Indigenous people of this land and continent, that we are not minorities, that we are the majority, that we deserve dignity and respect, that we have contributed much to society, many things historically that we don't even probably understand that we've contributed, because a lot of times I hear that we make no contributions to society, that everybody else does everything else, and that we just benefit from every other culture's hard work. And, that's not the truth. I think that we have just lacked in not documenting and being as vocal and outspoken about our contributions. But as I continue to learn, and, not that TikTok's my only source or Instagram, you start to see histories that have been buried, and more are starting to come out. And I think that shows the strength of who we are as people, and that we do need to continue to dig deep and really find our strength and our power. Because when you look inside that stadium is predominantly filled with brown people that look like us. And if only we had if only we could use that energy to transform and do the things that we need to fight for our communities, for our families, for jobs, for housing, we'd be unstoppable. So to me, I think it's important that we continue, no matter what kind of stuff people tell us, like, get over it, it's over, look at who supports them, different things. It doesn't matter. This is important. And we will continue to keep talking about it until we get the justice, until we make our communities believers, because it's important. It's very, very important.
And I will just add on to what Melissa was saying about the statements of people saying, just get over it. Had somebody listened to you, you would never be able to be a fan. Somebody stood up for you. Someone stood up for you to do everything you're doing today. And that's why those words are usually defense words, right? That's why I don't take them personal. I know the person's not ready to accept the reality of it. And that's why the Dodgers become appealing to them. They want to be part of something, because they rarely find that type of energy in their community. And the Dodgers just represent that. But I always remind them, you're a fan and you're not a family member. You had to break in to get there. You weren't wanted. You became a commodity, and so did all the players. And they're traded by white owners of the system. And Kaepernick made a really good video on it, I think, explaining the system. And even if you get paid, it still doesn't matter. You control the masses into that. And then you indoctrinate your children. And of course, I'm no one to tell anybody what to do with their money. But at the same time, the reality of what's happening in the home, that's what should govern us. And everyone's suffering. Everyone. There's not one person that I don't go to that has some type of financial problem or fear of the future. And those are things that we can't control as brown folks now, because they're the majority, like Melissa said. And it's about looking at the issue and seeing other people, because we have our Asian brothers and sisters and everyone around that can help in this issue, because we're all on this journey and it's going to end up in the same place. And this is why sometimes, when in the politics that I work in, we try to unify the people. And of course, the system never wants it, because what's right for us ends their right to steal everything. And that's why the corporation doesn't respond to us. And one more point on our story that's very important that Melissa touched on a little bit. This story of the communities of Palo Verde, La Loma and Bishop are like most of our stories that come from the Mexican-American Revolution, not revolution, but the period of the Chicanos, right? This story was driven by our women in our community. Most of the pictures, if not almost about 90% of them, only have women in them. The women were the first to organize. The women were the first to set meetings and protest in front of City Hall. Not only in City Hall when they didn't get their attention. My grandma was telling me that they went up to the mayor's door and sat at the mayor's door. And there's pictures of all of this. As we start to collect them and find out who has, there's rights to some of the paper, we'll start putting more up on the website. And I think the resistance of the Arechiga family, especially the grandma, was very prominent in some of the 8mm film that was captured. And that film just shows so much of how our women were, even though a lot of people talk bad about our women, that they were outspoken and they should be quiet. I mean, there was a lot of Mayor Polson was the worst one, and he was the mayor at the time when they took the land from the people. And he just said they were vulgar. When they were fighting for their rights, you were taking their homes away, and they weren't going to give them up, and they were going to say a lot of stuff to you. And they threw rocks, like Melissa said. I mean, today, when I look at that and I look at activism today and the protesting, it's exactly what we're doing. It's just in a bigger way in the city. Housing, the food vendors. I mean, it's to the point where we have to look at the writing on the wall to be able to understand what's happening to us. And that's why the history of the three communities, I always say it was relevant then. It's even more relevant today for us to look at. And I think it's just so important that everyone learn and take it back. And whatever we can do for the public, because we're always open to hold any type of meeting, any type of teachings, or even housing, the stuff that I'm doing at the housing level, to hold these meetings in there, because that's just part of us networking and trying to learn. It's what our community was built on. We try to use the values of the three communities to be able to come out and bring them into the community, to try to create them. And it's difficult, but like we always say, we're open, we're ready. We work with other organizations to bring resources in and to teach them what we know today, what has given us this platform to be able to talk more about it, but bring real issues with real responses and solutions. But with that, I'll leave it. Melissa, if you want to say something in the last 10 minutes, or if you're done.
No, I mean, I see Mexican Excellent putting up the videos from the protests. I think we didn't talk a little bit. I mean, we could say a little bit about that. I think that's important, an important aspect, or something that took place more currently, because like you say, all of our families in the community resisted, and in the current, we hadn't ever seen anybody do anything. So, we were extremely grateful to the three runners, but there was actually four people, because there was four people for the four directions. So as much as it was protest, it was also ceremony. for the 4 directions. And, you know, they took to the field. One stayed behind, but it was still 4 people for the 4 directions. And it was the names of the 3 communities and the name of the Indigenous community, again, for protest/ceremony to bring awareness. And the banner was dropped from the back that did read "Not Chavez Ravine." And I was so blown away by the activists that participated in this. I was so honored. I mean, I jumped out of my seat. I couldn't believe it. I almost fell to the ground. I was so happy, jumped up, jumped down, jumped all around. I mean, I was just, you know, because to me, that was a big deal that they did that they put themselves on the line to do that. Because, yeah, nobody has ever stood up to the Dodgers. And as much as we've reached out or requested or, you know, have done our work, this was big. So, and I wish that it wouldn't have gotten buried, because, you know, the Dodgers did resist and spent a lot of money in suppressing this and keeping it down and wiping the internet of it. But it did also get out too. So again, you know, that's something that, yeah, it's always going to be something that's big, huge to me, you know. I can only imagine. And I'm super grateful to those people and the community organizers and activists that put their bodies on the line and pulled this off. It's amazing, and I'm grateful and I'm appreciative.